Have you ever wondered what you have in common with a fingernail file? Or more importantly, have you ever wondered what all of humanity, say for the last 200,000 years ago, has in common with a fingernail file? This is one of the quirky, interesting things I learned about when I developed my geologic time spiral. You're probably familiar with a timeline. So imagine a timeline from the beginning of the Earth's history, represented by my right fingertips 4.6 billion years ago, all the way to my left fingertips representing the present. Now imagine that oldest time being wrapped around into the center and the youngest time circling around it. That's essentially what I did when I created my geologic time spiral. But you might be wondering why did I make this piece? Well, as a scientist, and especially as a geologist, I'm absolutely intrigued with geologic time. It is utterly incomprehensible to think about hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions, or especially billions of years that this Earth has existed. And I do relish the opportunity to tell geological stories with my art. And as an artist, I am drawn to share the beauty of stone. I love everything about stone. I love the colors, I love the textures. I even love the smell. When I'm cutting rocks in my studio, I just love the smell of cut rock. So it was a wonderful opportunity to be able to combine the history of geologic time in stone. So when I'm working on my designs, I switch from my right brain to my left brain and back again when I think through how to do them. And so when I tried to figure out a way to develop the geologic timeline as a piece of art in a spiral, I had only nature to look to. You see spirals in nature in the macrocosm. You see them in the microcosm. You see spirals in plants. You see them in animals. And sadly, we've seen this spiral all too often recently. When I was researching spirals, I found out about a compound spiral, which is what I used for the design. This cartoon on the left is a circle with 4 spirals in the middle, each depicting major divisions in geologic time. The cartoon on the right is the final design with the fossils in place. So to discuss what I used for the oldest material in the center of my geologic time spiral, we need to go back to the timeline. So as I mentioned, my right fingertip represents the Earth 4.6 billion years ago, but there were no rocks that were solid at that time. The oldest rocks we know about are about 4 billion years old, but they're very, very rare. And even rocks between 4 and 3 billion years old are hard to come by. They're usually just used for scientific study and not something that I could buy for commercial use. So I chose a rock that was 2.7 billion years old. This orbicular granite from Western Australia is a very special stone. Not only is it old, 2.7 billion years old, but it's so beautiful, and I felt so lucky that the round radiating pattern emulates exactly what I'm trying to do in the entire geologic time spiral. So outward from this material, we have rocks that are 2.5, 2.3, and 1.8 billion years old. 1 billion being right about here. So maybe you can see how we are honing in on that fingernail file. But the majority of the time spiral is done to help us understand what we're most excited about in geologic history, which is the history of life. Life began about 550 million years ago. Not billion, but mere million years ago. And I have inlaid 49 fossils that represent ages from the earliest to the present. The first spiral with life is called the Age of Ancient Life. And it starts at about 550 million and goes to 230 million years ago. These fossils, these critters, all lived in the ocean. We had trilobites, gastropods, ammonites, various things including coral. Then, about 230 million years ago, one of the amphibians came to land and started breathing air, and this was the start of the age of dinosaurs. The age of dinosaurs went from about 230 to 66 million years ago. And here you see I have inlaid various ammonites, a brittle star, some dinosaur bone, a Tyrannosaurus rex fossil, and a fossil shrimp, for example. The last spiral is the age of mammals. Here you see fossil fish, fossil plants, a shark's tooth, manatee teeth, and at the very end, I've sandblasted some human footprints into this white marble. These footprints and this fingernail file represent the history of humanity. A quick swipe of the fingernail file and all humanity is erased. That's why geologic time is so absolutely amazing and utterly humbling. So what was the process I used to create this geologic time spiral? It took over 200 hours, a lot of which was involved in research, planning, and correspondence with my client. I had to document and detail all of the information that was involved. Well, in order to get from that compound spiral to the final design, I had to go through several steps. First of all, I had to decide what colors of stone to use in the various spirals. The inner age of ancient life is where I've used dark reds, greens, and grays. For the second spiral, the age of dinosaurs, I used blues, greens, and purples. And finally, for this outer spiral, the age of mammals, I used warm neutrals, golds, and oranges. The next thing we needed to do was assemble all of the fossils for the piece, which took months because every single nook and cranny in the entire timeline had to be represented by something. Some of these weren't even available commercially, so my client, who is a fossil collector himself, had to go into his private collection and pull out some pieces, which he absolutely loved to do. So all in all, we had, as I mentioned, over 49 fossils, and I documented all of the scientific and locational information about every specimen. Of course, the fossils don't arrive in the studio in these beautiful oval and round shapes that you see inlaid into the piece. They come to us like this, very irregular, sometimes too thick, sometimes too thin, all different shapes. So we have to cut them. Here's an example of us cutting this fossil shrimp. On the top left, you see an image of it the way it was when it arrived at the studio, rather irregular. Then we've drawn a circle with a template around it, and then it goes to the saw, where most of the excess is cut off. Finally, it is ground with the grinder to make a perfect circle. So voila, here is the shrimp in its perfect circle inlaid into this green marble. That process is repeated for most all of the fossils in the piece. Here in the top left, you see a picture of some rough cut fossils. And then on the right, you see all of the fossils lined up after they've been cut, ground, sometimes polished, all labeled, and all ready to be inlaid into the piece. The next thing we need to do is take that cartoon that you saw and cut every piece out and lay it on the rocks that are going to be cut out of it. So here we've taped them on to the slabs and it's ready to go to the cutter. After the material is cut, we wash it, clean it up, make sure nothing's broken. We set it out to dry. On the bottom right, you see that this light green marble with the hole cut where this fossil shrimp is going to be inlaid. After everything is dry, we glue all the slabs to a substrate, and then we start thinking about grout. In places where we use the same stone to depict one section, we match the grout. So here you can see a bunch of popsicle sticks where we've been experimenting with different shades of grout to match the stone. Then the whole thing is taped except for the major seams, which we grout black. It's a very time-consuming and tedious process to do the taping, and it's a little bit messy to do the grouting, but in the end, it's worth it. So finally, we get to glue all of the fossil specimens into the piece, put on the border, put hangers on the back, and breathe a big sigh of relief. It's a great joy to finish a major piece like this, and I hope you enjoy it too.